How do we remember? It's a great question. It's the end of Moses' life and the children of Israel getting ready to enter into the promised land again. And Moses is reminding them of the things that they need to remember, reminding them of God's provision, God's faithfulness, and God's kindness. One of the things about worship is that if we don't set up opportunities to remember, we'll forget. Moses gives the children of Israel practical steps on how to remember. Our practices of memory can oftentimes sound like a weird thing, but Moses gave his people with what we could call practices of memory, intentional, deliberate patterns of behavior that remind them of their story. And their story is who they are, who God is, and how everything else should be viewed in the light of those two truths. He builds these activities into the rhythm of their lives to give them ongoing, regular opportunities to stop and to remember. Moses makes the memory and its connection explicit as he charges them. Listen to a few of these. He charges them to remember by teaching their children, Deuteronomy 4 and 9. He charges them to remember by proclaiming their faith, Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. He charges them to observe the Sabbath, Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15. He charges them to remember by giving thanks for their many blessings, Deuteronomy 8, verse 10. He charges them to remember by confessing their sins, Deuteronomy 9, 4 through 7. He charges them to remember by celebrating the Passover. It's Deuteronomy 16, verse 1 through 3. He charges them to remember by giving a tithe. It's Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 11. He charges them to remember by acting with justice and compassion towards their employees, Deuteronomy 15. He charges them to remember by being kind to immigrants and orphans, Deuteronomy 24. He charges them to remember to be kind to the poor, it's Deuteronomy 24. How do these things that Moses charges them with, how do they remind them of their story? What exactly are the children of Israel supposed to remember? Remember the Lord your God, sure. But another theme is remember what God has done for you. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out. Not only did he just bring you out, but he brought you out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Remember who you are and whose you are. Moses is setting up the very foundation of a full spiritual life, instigating the very things that every lover of the Lord and mature Christian needs to remember. It's that you need to remember. It's that you need to make space to interrupt your routine, to interrupt the mundane, to interrupt the busyness, to interrupt the things that could steal your attention. Oh, don't forget to remember. Remember to remember. Remember by celebrating me. Remember by not forgetting where you came from. Remember by proclaiming your faith. Remember by giving many thanks for the blessings that you've been given. Remember by helping the poor, remembering that you were once one of them. Remember by helping the immigrant. Remember by celebrating the Passover. Remember by giving your tithe. Set your life up in a way that interruptions to remember keep you on the right track. I love this verse, Psalm 111. It says, "Great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by all those who delight in them." All too often we miss this message. We forget. Some don't, however. Some don't. According to the psalmist in verse 2, those who delight in God's works ponder them. To delight in something requires stopping and noticing it, attending to it, treasuring it as you would a photograph. Indeed, a good description of what you do with that photograph in your hand is to ponder it. Ponder can sometimes sound passive or abstract, but the original Hebrew word is active and eager and brimming with life. It means to seek out with care, to search after, to inquire, to examine, to interrogate. So great are the works of the Lord. They are sought out. They are actively and eagerly brimming with life when they're thought about by those who delight in them. Kind of changes the way that verse sounds and what it means. Rehearsing and recalling and relishing your story and God's role in it, thanking Him, praising Him for rescuing us and giving us the gifts and the opportunities that we've had for the success and the service, acknowledging who we are and whose we are. Remembering is our goal. Remembering requires our deliberate attention. I can hear the Lord say now, remember. Do this in remembrance of me. Don't just gather, don't just come, don't just sing songs, but orient your heart and your mind and your soul around remembering. And don't let the things of the world steal your attention and cause you to forget what I've done for you. Remember those things. And don't just remember them, but tell your children and tell their children. Lift the mantle of what I've done in your life and remember those things, recall those things, because worship, our worship, is remembrance. And our remembering reminds us of how we ought to be. You know, forgetting doesn't take special effort. It just happens. It's our gravitational pull. Setting up instances and safeguards in our lives to where we don't forget and to where we intentionally remember is how we ought to live our lives. Worship is remembrance, and remembering reminds us of how we ought to be.